Welcome everyone once again for my third in the Society's fourth and final Zoom program of the season, and a special welcome to those joining us for the first time. Occasionally, a visitor to our museum at Palatial House will ask what era of Charlevoix history I would most like to relive. My reply is, there are two and they overlap, the era of the wind-driven schooner and the years of the motor-driven palatial yachts, just for the thrill of looking at them. So this first will be an overview of the great age of sail in Charlevoix based upon photos in our archives. The schooner era actually began a few years before our two channels were cut from July to early October in 1869 and lasted into the mid-1920s. Around 1865, pioneer businessmen Amos Fox and Hiram Rose built this 900-foot dock out into Lake Michigan, our first significant contact with the outside world. Lake schooners now began to tie up at Charlevoix regularly, along with the vessels for which its construction was intended, steams, freighters, and passenger boats that used it to take on wood fuel for the passage between Chicago and Buffalo. On October 8, 1869, the newly established local lumber company's small schooner called Mendota was towed in, the first substantial vessel to enter Round Lake at a cutting. This photo, believed to be one of the very first taken in Charlevoix, if perhaps not the first, showed what the channel entrance looked like less than 1 year later. This milestone event opened the gates. Charlevoix was now on the map, and because of this determined never say die breakthrough project accomplished by a handful of local visionaries, Charlevoix County would blossom beyond their wildest dreams. Over the following decade, the channel was widened in stages until it reached its present in 1882. This is believed to be the first photo taken after the widening, which now allowed the largest lake vessels of the time to go all the way to the ends of both arms of Lake Charlevoix. Notice a widened channel and the schooners are in the center of Round Lake in the mid-1880s. For the next half-century, they came by the score to what many mariners, both commercial and otherwise, consider to be the finest natural harbor on the Great Lakes. Even then, like now in summer, demand exceeded supply, and there were not enough docks to accommodate them all. The southwest corner of Round Lake, near Ward Brothers, was a favorite place for multiple tie-up, as seen in this classic. Schooners didn't have power, so they needed tugs to take them both in. Yes, you are seeing correctly between the masts. Charlevoix's lighthouse began its existence in 1885 at the end of the North Pier until 1911 when it was moved to the South Pier and out. Before steam power and large vessels finally took over, wind-powered schooners were a major component of the lifelines of the lakes, and steam-powered tugs were the lifelines of the ports around them. This photo was taken around 1907 by our famous builder in stone, Earl Young, when he was in his late teens. It shows the deplorable state of a virtually non-existent revetment, which the federal government had allowed to go to pieces for some unexplained reason until only a handful of pilings remained. Once they reached Round Lake, schooners tied up mainly the docks located at the ends of Clinton Street, May Street, Seam here, and Antrim Street. At the end of Park Avenue was reserved for steam passenger vessels. An enlargement of this photo and the next one would show that schooners all came out of Wisconsin, most from Sheboygan, one from Racine. Earl Young took the photo of 4 schooners, or windjammers as he called them, at the Antrim Street dock under the bowsprit of another in 1904 at age 15. The schooners are mentioned by name in summer resident and famed American poet Sarah Teasdale's poem titled Schooners, Charlevoix Harbor, that was published in either Scribner's or Harper's Magazine. 4 lines from it. But ah, the gentle sailing ships that never will come back. Oh, gentle ships, oh, quiet ships, where are you anchored now? In 1954, Earl approached the Eastman Kodak Company to enlarge the 2.5 by 3.5 inch negative into a mural for his new weather vane restaurant. Kodak said it couldn't be done, but the new Translite company said it would try, produced the biggest mural it had ever done to that time, about 7 by 10 feet. It was colorized in Indiana. Earl added pines, deck plankings, and a gull in front of it. The backlit ensemble graced the alcove over the stairway to the lower level of the restaurant until 2001, when, cracked, peeling, and beginning to fade, it had to come out to be replaced by a mirror. Weather Vane today is considering the possibility of replicating another one. So wouldn't Ward Brothers love to have them lined up like this, 6 deep, day after day after day after day? How did the crew set foot on land? They stepped from one vessel to the other, sometimes 6 or more boats abreast. Many schooners were lined up like this, not because they were in Charlevoix on business, because this was an excellent port in a storm and they had raced here to get out of harm's way. They needed to hang their sails up to dry before they set out again, so this was a common sight on Round Lake and certainly one of the most picturesque. The businesses that were served by visiting schooners were a bedrock, like the Charlevoix Lumber Company next to the bridge where the Edgewater Hotel is now. Only 3 years after the sawmill opened, it was loading onto one schooner after another and shipping out lumber to help rebuild Chicago after the Great Fire 1871, and went on to supply millions of board feet of lumber harvested in the Lake Charlevoix Basin that went into building the Midwest. The 2 schooners on the right were called 3 Stickers. Across the road from the lumber company stood the grist mill, there since 1885, to which grain was brought and from which processed flour was taken for shipment all over the country. When kids see this picture, they immediately say, "That's a pirate ship." Arrgh. Schooners like the Sea Gem, whose home port was Charlevoix, often wintered beside the mill and in Round Lake. Had the Weather Vane Inn been there back then, this is what you would have seen from the lower level. One of our most frequent and favorite visitors was the Rosabelle out of Milwaukee, who Sarah Teasdale immortalized in that same poem with a beautiful imagery of the lines, "Where is the scarlet Rosabelle that brought the mill its grain? Her white sails dripping with the sun or grayed against the rain." As if in response to the poem's question, having survived long after many of her kind were gone, the Rosabelle, laden with lumber, sank in a storm while on a run from Milwaukee to Benton Harbor on October 30th, 1921, with the loss of all hands. Here she is being towed across Round Lake toward the railroad bridge at Lake Charlevoix. Another schooner that passed through Charlevoix many times was the Rouse Simmons, about to receive a scow-load of tan bark harvested on the south shore of Beaver Island and destined for the great tannery that once lined the Boyne City waterfront. She wintered here in Charlevoix in 1903 and 1904. The Rouse Simmons passed into history and world recognition as the famed Christmas tree ship that for many years delivered trees from the Upper Peninsula to lower income families in Chicago. Its last journey was in late 1913 when, laden solely with its green cargo, it went down off the Wisconsin coast in a gigantic gale. A family musical has recently been staged in many places that commemorates the boat, its intrepid and beloved Captain Santa and crew, all of whom were lost. Think of how many people would come down to East Park just to see a boat like the Porter at the Clinton Street dock drying its sails. Charlevoix can claim a vessel built in town in 1880, the little scow schooner Lottie Mason. You can just see her name and Charlevoix on the bow at lower left. She made Grand Haven her home port after 1895 and was listed as still being on the lakes in 1903. The Lottie Mason was rather a hard luck case. She went ashore, hit a bridge abutment, was grounded twice, sank, and raised. This is how you would have seen her if you were standing in today's doorway of Ward Brothers. Business, of course, expanded far beyond town, as seen an 1889 aerial map that shows at top a tug about to tow Lake Charlevoix into Round Lake through the 20-year-old upper channel. The size of some of these vessels can be seen here, as an ordinary one dwarfs the large passenger steamer Thomas Bryant at the Belvedere Resort dock while it passes by into Round Lake. Where had they been, such as the sleek, magnificent Hackley out of Milwaukee? Look at the size of those masts. Down at Ironton, the great pig iron smelter, or at least they might have done until 1893 when the nation's financial crisis killed the business. Here can be seen the men who were later thrown out of work loading the ingots, called pigs, into a schooner. They went on to East Jordan to both sides of the causeway that still leads into town over the southern tip of Lake Charlevoix's south arm. They were able to access the far side of the causeway by means of the swing bridge that graced Charlevoix's lower channel from 1878 to 1901, when it was taken apart in sections, hauled down the winter ice, and reassembled here on its turntable. Schooners took away both lumber and the products of the East Jordan Chemical Plant and Iron Company further upshore from town, and also docked at the causeway's west side. On Lake Charlevoix's north shore, they load up at the Cram and Whitford lumber camp at Undine near Horton Bay and struck gold on the Boyne City waterfront in the form of both iron and mountains of lumber seen above the arrows. It was said, with only slight exaggeration, that there was once so much lumber stacked on the Boyne City waterfront that a person driving a carriage along the street rarely saw the water, and a person who got on top of the first stack could skip several blocks along the tops of the others and never touch their feet on the ground. There was so much pig iron waiting to be shipped out from Boyne's ironworks that the stacks of ingots in an area larger than a football field. The grain of sail in and through Charlevoix prospered for several decades. Tug captains salivated at the chance to take multiple tows in and out. Here a twosome being taken from Round Lake at dawn. Notice that all sails are still furled. As they made their way down the channel, once they neared Michigan, the sails started to appear. Here you can see there's not much wind to get them started. That was not the case when a schooner, here again the Rosabelle, had to pull up to a revetment to wait out the hours until the wind died down. You can see the wind lifting the skirt of the lady in front of the grist mill, while the lady to her left is holding on to her hat. Round Lake be as calm as a cucumber, and Lake Michigan something else. Hilarious tales came down the years of the links to which quick-witted tug captains would go to outfox one another when rumors of an upcoming lucrative multiple tow began to make the rounds, so they could be first in line. People thrilled to parades of the tall ships now. Back then, it was often an everyday occurrence. And speaking of multiple vessels, in April 1871, after the lake ice was largely gone and shipping resumed, the Charlevoix Sentinel reported that on a single day alone, 60 vessels came into view off Charlevoix. At one moment, 42 alone were seen between North and South Points. Of course, these schooners were made of wood and vulnerable. Masted for years, many for a very little time, and some went ashore, like the Jenny Mullen did on our Lake Michigan beach. In the very early 20th century, ship owners thought nothing of dumping their aged or wrecked vessels on the northeast shore of Round Lake. You can just make out, in the distance, 3 tilt masts to the right of the sunken tug. These belonged to the schooner Ebenezer. Here you can see the boat from another angle as a sister vessel is being towed into Charlevoix near the Belvedere Bayou. Those same tilting masts just above the schooner's stern. This is what the Charlevoix Sentinel editor Willard Smith had to say about the situation on May 2, 1907. While we are talking about Charlevoix the Beautiful, take a look toward the east side of the harbor, and you will see old discarded hulks that block the beautiful cotillion of Round Lake. If we propose to maintain a marine cemetery in the city limits, for heaven's sake, let us fence it in. Otherwise, let us prohibit the piling up of wrecks along the shores of the harbor. It looks bad. Apparently, Willard's words were heeded. In August, it was announced that the Ebenezer would be moved near Point City to be used as a resort dock. If larger vessels were damaged beyond repair or had outlived their useful lifetimes, a few were towed to Oyster Bay, the mile-long inlet about 3 miles east of town on Lake Charlevoix. There they were scuttled and abandoned, like the Avery at top that in 1891 brought the first 400 tons of steel rails that connected Charlevoix to Petoskey, until they wasted away and only a remnant of them poked above the water. So the age of sail was overtaken by the age of steam, steam here coming up behind on the horizon. Overlapping eras that brought schooners every day into Charlevoix, followed by steam passenger vessels and freighters. Hundreds upon uncounted hundreds of vessels now for over a century and a half. Wouldn't it be nice to lie on Lake Michigan Beach or float in the water down there, look up, and see it happen once again? The indescribably beautiful lines of a schooner between the piers, nearing the lighthouse, making its silent whisper way into Round Lake, an image that has always been the essence of Charlevoix and encapsulation of its history. The image was another taken by a teenage Earl Young. Also, how tall do you think those schooners could be? Consider this. Our first lighthouse, shown here, stood about 30 feet from pier top to lantern finial. Multiplied and juxtaposed against the taller mast of this schooner, you would find that mast from keel to tip would top 100 feet above the water. For the second part of the program, we'll see highlights of the era that overlap that of the schooner by just around 3 decades. Charlevoix has always been a destination for some of the largest private yachts that sail not only the Great Lakes, but also the world's oceans. They still occasionally come here, but nothing like what Charlevoix had previously witnessed over half a century. Nor do they fit into much of Charlevoix's recent history other than just being here. The Sea Corporation yacht was once a frequent visitor. In recent years, Ivana Trump came to town aboard hers. The L'Oreal Corporation yacht appeared, an IB vessel arrived, and some huge ones have come in with strict orders to their crews not to divulge their ownership to anyone, with registration in places like the Cayman Islands. A search of the internet comes up blank. A few of these boats have been known to park themselves on the East Park waterfront for the entire summer season and hardly move and draw people like iron filings to a magnet from the park and Bridge Street. On their upper decks might be seen small sport or amphibian cars, even a helicopter. The first one we'll look at is the Dorothea. From the inscription, you might be wondering why this beauty sports the label of a United States steamship. The reason is she was built as a palatial yacht in Philadelphia in 1898 when the man who commissioned her died. The U.S. government bought her unfinished and had her completed for use as a, quote, torpedo boat destroyer, unquote, and patrol boat, which latter function she fulfilled off the coast of Cuba during the time of the Spanish-American War. In 1901, the state of Illinois asked the government for a vessel to be used as a training ship for its naval militia. The government picked the Dorothea. Loaded with cadets, she steamed northward every summer until 1909 when she was replaced. The Dorothea visited Charlevoix many times and was a beautiful sight within Round Lake as seen here and on maneuvers in Lake Charlevoix, especially when she passed through the upper channel with her white hat cadets lined up along both port and starboard decks. Jumping ahead a couple of days to the golden era of our yachts, in the 1920s, Logan Thompson of the Belvedere Club, head of the Champion Coated Paper Company of Hamilton, Ohio, north of Cincinnati, had named a series of boats after his wife, beginning with small racing vessels. The 133-foot Sylvia IV was built in Bay City and was considered to have the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art technological gear times. She first arrived in Charlevoix in 1926. To house her, Thompson built a boathouse on the south shore of Round Lake. According to a former crew member, the boat carried a crew of 14 and it cost $600 to fully refuel. He also claimed that when she was taken into the boathouse, the crew had to pull her in as far as she could go because when the doors were closed behind her, he could place his thumb tip against the taffrail, spread his hand, and his little finger would touch the door. The 226-foot single-screw steel-hulled Venetia was built at Leith, Scotland in 1904 for an Englishman. She went through 3 more owners till she came into the hands of San Diego industrialist John Spreckels in 1911. The U.S. Navy leased the Venetia and refitted her in 1917 for use as a patrol craft with the designation SP-341. Her duty, specifically German U-boat location and chase during World War I. The Venetia arrived in the Azores in January 1918 and went on to chase 2 U-boats, severely damaging one, putting it out of commission, and chasing off another before it could strike. She reportedly sank 2 others, one the sub that had destroyed the Lusitania in 1915. For her services, she was awarded 2 what were called Stars of Reward that can be seen on her upper stack. The Venetia returned to San Diego in February of 1919 and was handed back to Spreckels in April. He died in 1926. 2 years later, the yacht came into the ownership of James Fairplay of Midland, Ontario, who took her on a cruise with several gentlemen friends. The largest pleasure boat on the Great Lakes reached Charlevoix in July of 1928 for a 2-night stay and a golf excursion at the Belvedere course that so impressed Fairplay he expressed a strong desire to return later in the summer for an indefinite length of time. It is not known if he ever followed up. The Venetia disappeared from Lloyd's Register of Yachts in 1968. It appears from the photos that the huge vessel sailed into Round Lake, turned around, and came back out to pull up to the South Channel revetment near the Coast Guard and fish hatchery, probably because there was no place along the inner harbor large enough to accommodate her length for 2 nights. The following year, on August 29, a lapse of attention almost spelled calamity when longtime bridge tender Elmer Johnson closed the lower channel swing bridge on the Sylvia IV. At 8:45 in the evening, she entered the channel from Lake Michigan and signaled for the bridge to open. From the bridge house, it was impossible to see all the way down the channel because of its bend to the northwest and the fact the 4-story gristmill next door, where the weather vane is now, sliced off the view. This later aerial shot shows approximately that section of the channel below the green line, I hope you can see it, that could be seen from the bridge house. Johnson had noticed a sailboat in the channel close by, assumed its signal was the one he heard, and swung the bridge toward Round Lake. The Sylvia IV would have had to be below the green line for Johnson to see her. So with his attention focused on the sail's entry off to the left, when it cleared the tip of the bridge, he began to close the span, only to his horror to see the Sylvia IV swimming into view on his right. It was too late for either to stop. Although Roy Ranger, the boat's captain, saw what was about to happen, it did manage to reduce speed and reverse. This would have been his view with the closing bridge about to meet the fast-going Sylvia. The bridge raked along the yacht's upper deck, took out all port railings, 3 davits, the spar, and crushed a yawl. Fortunately, it missed the pilot house. The windows of the deck house crashed in. People on Bridge Street could hear the 10 or so people inside it screaming for their lives. According to the Charlevoix Sentinel account, Had Sylvia been going faster, they might have been swept overboard. Loud, wrenching sounds of the collision reverberated all over Charlevoix. There were those who swore they could hear Captain Ranger's oaths further away than that. Totally confused when he saw the damaged boat proceeding again, instead of keeping the bridge open, Johnson began to close it. This time he snapped off the flagpole. When the Sylvia docked at her boathouse, unholy mess was revealed. But Thompson recognized what had happened. It was an accident, pure and simple, and was grateful no one was hurt. The arrow shows where the bridge pushed in this corner of the superstructure. The self-esteem of Elmer Johnson, who was suspended for a few days during an investigation by state officials, took as great a battering as the boat, the worst moment of his otherwise estimable career for which he was responsible. Thompson sent the boat back to Bay City for repairs, unaware he would have her for only another year. Originally built for the Navy in 1926, but not commissioned because of an international agreement to limit the size of the world's naval fleets, this 185-foot steel vessel came into the ownership of a Mrs. Cadwallader of Palm Beach, Florida, who paid $525,000 and named her the Samarona. She sold to another party who in 1929 sold the $375,000 to Eugene McDonald of Chicago, founder and president of the Zenith Electronics Corporation. McDonald named her Mizpah, which means, "The Lord watches between me and thee when we are absent from one another." She was one of the largest luxury yachts on the Great Lakes, with gold-plated doorknobs and a crew of 27. McDonald did electronic testing on the Mizpah, even taking her to Cocos Island near Costa Rica in 1938 to test a rudimentary form of radar that was found to have potential, the scope and importance of its future use yet to be realized. Charlevoix was the Mizpah's home base over many summers. In 1932, McDonald brought several guests to town, one of them in the company of British nobility, Gutzon Borglund, taking a break from sculpting the faces on Mount Rushmore. But like almost all of her kind, she was taken for war duty in 1942 and served as Patrol Yacht 29, the USS Mizpah, on escort duty along the Atlantic coast, during which no ship she escorted was ever hit. After the war, the Navy gave McDonald $175,000 for her, then sold her to a shipping company in Honduras for use as a banana transport boat between Central America and Tampa, Florida. Damaged on a reef during a storm 20 years later, she was towed to Tampa, found to be too costly to repair, and the Mizpah ended her life in 1968 as an artificial reef in the Atlantic north of Palm Beach. In 1930, the queen of them all arrived in Charlevoix, considered to be the most beautiful vessel ever to grace our waters, the 191-foot Sylvia, now with no Roman numeral, one of 5 identical vessels built on spec in Maine. Logan Thompson went out for a look and fell in love. Well, who wouldn't? Take a look at the dining salon. Thompson sold the Sylvia for a founder of Oldsmobile, summer resident Ransom E. Olds, and brought in the Sylvia, whose home port was Charlevoix, for the next 11 years. You can see the word Charlevoix at the arrow. She even carried some Charlevoix fellows in her crew. Whenever the Sylvia glided across Round Lake, Bridge Street pedestrian and vehicular traffic came to a standstill, as if every viewer was mesmerized. Sometime in the 1930s, as I was told a few years ago by the granddaughter of the boat's skipper, Thomas Morrison, Logan Thompson chartered the Sylvia to some friends, 2 of the era's tabloid fodder, at the time at the height of their notorious relationship, actress Katharine Hepburn and aviator Howard Hughes. We do know for sure that Hughes chartered the vessel for a trip to Cuba with Hepburn, but I'm not putting too much credence about a trip to Charlevoix because it would have been the talk of many here for years. But if it did happen, which a somewhat reliable source claimed it did, free-spirited Kate allegedly skinny-dipped in Round Lake in full view of the Sylvia's crew, which activity is to this day not unheard of, as claimed by those with a good pair of binoculars. As a matter of fact, Bert Staley's hardware store had a telescope mounted in a window for public use, and whenever anyone was spotted in the buff, he'd call his cronies who would come down for a look. Children are allegedly not permitted use of the telescope during these times. The Kankara II was one of the 5 identical vessels built by the Bath Iron Works in Maine. The other 3, later named the Placida, the Trudione, the Leaties, which ended up in the British Royal Navy. Sometime in the early 1930s, the Kankara II came to Charlevoix to visit her sibling, the only known time 2 of the 5 enjoyed a reunion. In September of 1932, during Prohibition, Time magazine reported that then-owner Kenneth G. Smith, president of the Precedent Company, was stopped by customs officials in Chicago, where they found $2,500 worth of liquor aboard the boat after she returned from a cruise in Canadian waters. Said jolly Mr. Smith, "It was for medicinal purposes. I didn't know there was so much medicine aboard." So what happened to the Sylvia IV? When Logan Thompson offered both the boat and her custom-built boathouse to his friend and fellow Belvedere member Ransom E. Owles, Owles called the vessel the Riamar IV. The name formed after his initials and the first 3 letters of his side business in maritime equipment. It, like the Sylvia, was fated to be the last in a series. Like most of her kind, the Riamar IV was taken by the government for war duty in 1942 and never returned. The tranquil, idyllic days of yacht travel were about to go on hiatus for several years excuse me, as the reality of war intervened. That's the Sylvia, the 2 masts in the far middle distance, and the Riamar IV at right. Sensing what was about to happen in a severely troubled world, Thompson donated the Sylvia to the federal government 7 months before Pearl Harbor. She left Charlevoix in late April of 1941 for the Brooklyn Navy Yard and never came back. Here she is, steaming through the upper channel into Lake Charlevoix for her farewell voyage, with the American flag emblazoned on her collar, painted backward to resemble a flag flying from her flagpole. Once she completed her loop around the lake, she came back in, crossed through town, and at the neck of the channel met the high school band and almost the entire tearful population of Charlevoix, waiting beside the bridge and along the channel to cheer the Charlevoix Sylvia into the lower channel with one last bon voyage. Gutted and converted within weeks, she served under the name Patrol Yacht Tourmaline. The boat was sold for the Greek War relief effort in 1946, used as a freighter passenger vessel in the Aegean, named first the Adelphic, then the Kyknos, and the last mention of the once great Sylvia was of being scrapped in 1979. And what happened to the Sylvia IV Riamar IV boathouse? It became Brow Marina for several years, then lapsed into almost total ruin, until it was rescued and turned into the Harbor Club condominiums next door to John Cross Fisheries. 1988 saw the arrival of the smaller Sequoia as part of a fundraising campaign to save the yacht of the President of the United States. No, Red wasn't on it. Do you remember those famous photos of Nixon and shady dealer Bibi Rabosa on the Sequoia's rear deck plotting world domination? 9 presidents slept in this bed and took their meals at the salon table. To finish up, the Eleanor, of which we have been able to find next to nothing, shown at bottom berth below today's Bridge Street tap room, and right next to Charlevoix's sewage treatment plant. That must have been a bit interesting. This one, a huge one, parked along a new East Park, while this, to me, looks like it was designed designed to be going 80 miles an hour into a strong headwind. And this mood shot, also the boat Unknown on a misty round lake. So that's a sampling of the pleasure boats that once graced the waters of Charlevoix for years on end, in an era when 5 or more at one time was a not uncommon sight. I hope you enjoy this overview of our beautiful schooners and palatial yachts with their unique histories and stories. It was a pleasure once again to have you with us.